Hi everyone, it's Raina. So this video is if you have your sun in Sagittarius and your moon in Virgo, as I do. So Sagittarius and Virgo are both mutable signs. Sag is fire and Virgo is earth, and they form a square as mutable signs. Now, technically, let's say your sun is at 3 degrees of Sagittarius and your Virgo moon is 20 degrees of Virgo. They're not going to be an actual square. This is just talking about if they're within a certain degree span, but I'm still going to speak of that square as driving a lot of, if you want to call it, the conflict between the sun and the moon here. So the sun can be how you shine in this world. So we can call that self-expression, probably why the sun rules the 5th house and rules the sign of Leo and the 5th house, and Leo are connected to self-expression, creative self-expression. Virgo rules the 6th house of health. It's an earth sign, it's an earth house. The 6th house, it's about your physical health, it's about the service you offer to other people, and it is also, well, I'm talking about Virgo, but actually I should be talking about the moon. The moon rules your emotional nature. I call it the shadow self. Maybe because I have the moon in Virgo, I look at emotions with a lot of suspicion and not much like, thinking that they're going to be productive a lot of times. And I think I'm right about that. And the reason I do as well is because, you can have the sun in Virgo and the moon in Virgo. What is the difference? And I feel like the sun represents the things that are more in the light. The moon is reflecting. So to me, it is more of the shadow elements. And in this case, I feel like the critical nature of the moon can come more to the forefront versus with the sun in Virgo. So if you know people who have the sun in Virgo and you have the moon in Virgo, you can see the differences. Even like if they are criticizing something, there's more of a dark edge to it when the moon is there. It's more like really kind of taking it to the personal level. So one of the things that I put down here is that the square thwarts self-expression because the sun wants to express itself and express its core personality. And when the moon is in Virgo, there can be a lot of inhibition. You can feel very self-conscious. I know that has been true for me. I mean, even when I'm doing these videos and my partner is in the same apartment, I'll tell him, can you go in the other room? I don't want to do anything in front of him. I sound like I'm talking about going to the bathroom, really. But yeah, so you may feel that because the sun, and you think about, again, the sun rules Leo, and Leo's a ham. The sun wants to express itself. Think about children. The inner child wants to come out and play when you're an adult. But when you're a child, you tend to be less inhibited. You tend to be more spontaneous with expressing who you are and doing whatever, whenever, because you don't have this inner critic that is kind of just always like wagging its finger at you. And that's what you have here. And I think, the beautiful thing is that knowledge is power. And I think that also time can, heal all wounds. And if you feel that this is true for you, as you get older, you start to, give less of a damn what people think about you. hopefully, unless you haven't grown out of that kind of adolescent phase. But in general, you're less self-critical as you get older because, you just know that your time here is limited anyway. And it's like it's foolish to care about that kind of stuff. But, when you're on the younger side, it can really rear its ugly head. And it can stop you if you have a lot of talent in this area. Whether it's with performing or even just creative talent in general, that can also create some kind of blockage, and you may not do it, and you may be very good. It's funny because when I was in grade school, I was in the theater, actually even up until high school to some degree, but in grade school for sure, and I was in different plays, and in one of the plays I auditioned for, I played the lead character, and I think it's true for a lot of Sagittarians that they tend to procrastinate, and I procrastinated learning my lines until the last minute, and the play director, was pulling her hair out, and I just delivered, and I'm always amazed because I feel like this combination could even give a bit of stage fright or just that feeling. And I think stage fright is a lot of that inner critic coming out more than anything, even more than just being naturally shy. If you're a naturally shy person, I think some naturally shy people can come to life on stage, and they have those two distinctive parts to themselves, but this is a little bit different. And one thing to note too is that the moon can be the mother, and so you may have had or still continue to have a mother who is very critical of you. When that happens as a young child, you internalize that kind of criticism, and that can make the person very self-conscious. So what I put down here, and I don't know if this is true, I put the father is positive and the mother is negative. And it may not be that simplistic, but it could be along those lines because the sun represents the father. Now, here's another thing too, just not necessarily about you specifically, about your parents. When there's a square between the sun and moon, just like when there's a square between Venus and Mars, you can see your parents not getting along. And depending on your own personality type and how you perceive things, this can make you, give you these kind of, you can internalize that as being the way that it is in terms of the male-female relationship. Same-sex relationships, I don't know how that works. It could just be the same, but I'm really looking at gender here because of the the polarity. So that's why I'm saying that specifically about male-female relationships, and even non-sexual ones. I mean, you may just look at the opposite sex as being impossible, as I can't get them to see the truth about life, because the square is very frustrating and it's clashing. And so you may see yourself clashing with the opposite sex. And that is not, that would be a misperception because it's almost what we call an overgeneralization. You take one thing that happened and then make it true for everything. So it's you could call it a form of a prejudice or something like that. But things that happen in childhood, when a child isn't capable of understanding it intellectually at a higher level, you have to kind of forgive that because it takes time to unravel those kinds of things. Now, you can have blocked warmth. There's something, I wouldn't call it cold with the Virgo moon, but it's not warm and fuzzy. Fire, Aries, Leo, Sag, can give off warmth, but because the moon is in that emotional sign, it can block that. Now, people may sense your caring nature in spite of that. And the moon in Virgo is very practical, so it shows it cares, and this is also true about Venus in Virgo, by doing things for others. So you may lack that kind of sentimentality. You have to look at your Venus sign as well. And you might think that's kind of corny or just seems or you might not mind it if somebody gives it to you, but you just kind of, it's just hard for you to express emotions in that very open and sometimes gushing kind of way. But you might appreciate from other people, and that's true for me. I have a partner who's much more, and he has his, it's funny, we both have Sun in Sag and Moon in Virgo, but he's got water in some of his inner planets. So that kind of balances my Earth. And some of you may have water with some of your inner planets, and you have much more ability to be warm. So I would say that look to your Venus and Mars for more information on that. But if you're like me and you have, let's say you have Venus in Aquarius, I have Venus in Aquarius and Mars in Capricorn, you see. And that is a bit tricky for really being, expressing the emotions in a very flowy kind of a way. And one thing I want to note about squares is that you can overcome these. I don't want to make it like you're doomed and this is it. It's just that you have to work for it. And we also have to be careful with the idea about working for something, not to be overbearing. It's not so much about, I have to make this work. It's about, this is a challenge of mine. And I have to be conscious of my challenges and kind of like, be aware of how these are showing up for me, not to get frustrated, but to say, okay, this is something that I need to work on a little bit. This is even if you have hard angles with any two planets, you're going to see the elements of these things present and accounted for regardless. There's a site called astrofix.com, I think it's called, and they do those brainstorms, those things where you just put down keywords, and they don't even specify whether they're talking about squares or conjunctions or trines, and they just put down, so you could look at something like that, like a square, but just the fact that these two planets, if they are forming some kind of an angle, they will give you these keywords, and a lot of times they don't specify squares or anything else, and I think maybe that's why they do that, because they want you to know that you still possess these qualities because these two planets are joining forces. And one of the things that Sagittarius and Virgo have in common is the intellect. For Sagittarius, Sag rules the 9th house, and this is the higher mind. And yes, we talk about academia, which is the university level of learning and teaching. But I would say even more than that is the wisdom, more than learning, because to me, the affairs of this world are mundane knowledge, mundane world. So even at a university, it might be more sophisticated mundane knowledge, but still mundane knowledge. Abstract information is more beyond the 3D or the linear mind. So that's what Sag represents, and Virgo represents the more practical side. It is Mercury, but it's like learning something for the practical application. And so here we have that clash again, because you've heard that quote, "Man cannot live by bread alone." So just the mundane information, that doesn't inspire us. That might help us navigate this world, but this is a temporary world. We're not going to be here forever. So we have to, I don't want to say prepare for not being here, but I guess it's a form of preparation, because the more that, maybe that is what the spiritual life is. You're preparing your higher self. You're preparing yourself to connect more with your higher self, because the more you connect with your higher self, the less you'll fall prey to the traps of this world. They're trying to get you to be afraid, the manipulation and the seduction, all of that. So this gives you an ability to, if you can integrate it, to be quite well-rounded, where you have the sage part of yourself, but you also have the practical side. And the moon is about nurturing, so it really, especially with health matters, this combination, I think, can be very interesting in alternative health. I know I am. And where there's a challenge, I think, when it comes to like spirituality, is like this idea of the practical versus the spiritual. You might be skeptical of the spiritual, and I know that has been true for me, that I just question a lot, and that's one of the reasons I finally realized I probably would never fit into an organized system, just because I always find the fly in the ointment. That's the moon in Virgo, the princess and the pea, type of thing. Finding that little, and then it really bothers you. So creating your own spiritual, constructing your own spiritual belief system, maybe taking from different sources, and at the same time having healthy skepticism. I think it is healthy to be skeptical about things. Some people are not discerning, and they may have a great deal of intuition, but they lack discernment, and they are vulnerable to, even at the highest, at the most dramatic sense, cults, things that try to get them to be controlled, mind control. So I think that there's something good to be said about even having this square or having these two elements in your chart together, because I feel like they can be compatible. It doesn't have to be one or the other, but there might be some people with this combination who are atheists, who have decided that, and maybe you are in academia and you believe, I was going to say, people are saying, I believe in science. And then they say that everybody else is in a cult. And they sound like the biggest cultists on the planet. But you might be one of, now I just insulted you, right? You might be one of those types of people that you believe in research, in the academic, in the life of the mind, and you have really gone into that intellectual side. There may be people who, if you have other factors, look at your Neptune to see if you have, maybe you have the sun in conjunction with Neptune, or maybe the moon is in conjunction with Neptune. You have, so that makes you more into the spiritual and kind of like to the point of even like rejecting the practical if you have 12th house placements. And that can be an overreaction in that sense. So you want to be able to balance things. Think about in the tarot, the Temperance card is connected to Sagittarius. And yeah, I mean, I think people with this combination are very snarky, and it can be funny, but it can be kind of like a little bit cruel if you don't watch out, because Sag, the symbol of Sag is the archer, and the archer is targeting the bullseye, and they can do it with their remarks, and it can be kind of ouch. Yeah, and that's another thing too. Like, you can be critical to the point of like cruelty because you can really, nail it on the head, and really get to what that person is doing wrong or what have you, but it can almost be too much, So what I have discovered with myself as I've gotten older is having more diplomacy. Of course, that's a work in progress, but also trying to be more sensitive to others in terms of criticism and how you phrase it. I notice a lot of people these days saying, well, I'm just saying the truth. I'm just telling it like it is. And they're hiding behind the truth. And that is, especially when there's a destructive or vindictive element to it, that is not okay. That is not okay. So there was something else I wanted to say. I think that this can make you very analytical as well as intuitive at the same time. And it's a very good combination. Again, you have to integrate both of these tendencies, because analysis, you've heard the term analysis paralysis. When you analyze too much, you're in your mind too much, and you just go down a rabbit hole. And you don't want to do that. You want to be able to get to that bigger picture that the sun in Sag represents. And I'll leave you with this, is that Sag is about the bigger picture and Virgo is about details. And you may find that you're either obsessing about details or you're lost in the bigger picture, and that you can't get it together to work both ways. And it can be very frustrating. And I know that's true because a lot of times I'll say to myself, oh, I'm very good at details. And yet, it will really bug me when I see that, like, I was typing something and I left out a word. I'm like, how did I do that? Because I'm always correcting people about grammar and stuff like that. See, that's one of my things. But I'm doing it really believing that they should know that they misspelled a word, or that they, misused a word, something like that. I'm doing it from the perspective that I think I'm being helpful, but that may not be received as such. That may be received as being insulting, And I understand that. It hasn't stopped me from doing it yet, but maybe one day. I think Sagittarius is it's not a petty sign. It's a noble sign. So you don't want to veer into that persnickety vibe of Virgo and just be too caught up in details, almost to the point of being OCD. Also, the snarkiness can be amusing up until a point, and then it can be not so funny anymore. So anyway, that's what I have for you. I hope that this resonated. If you would like a private reading, the link is below. And you should, now that you know that I have this combination, you should know that I, do get involved in details. So I'm detail related or detail oriented, I guess you would call it. Thank you for listening. Take care. Bye.